We're trying to get a sense of who's here and who we're working with. We are prepared for the international participation, as you can see, because one of the discoveries, one of the experiences that I've had over the last few years is discovering just how I hesitate the word universal because, but how I've yet to find a cultural context in which people don't tell stories, in which they don't use stories to solve very similar problems and questions. And so what you see here is a result of people in various parts of the world using public narrative in different ways in their language and in their context to do work of leadership development. Let me just set the context a little bit. Public narrative is a leadership skill, a leadership practice. But it's rooted in a notion of leadership that, well, the hazard here is that as many different sessions on leadership as you attend, you'll find different definitions. So let me give you mine. My approach to leadership is based on three questions posed by a first-century Jerusalem scholar, Rabbi Hillel, who when asked, how do I figure out what to do in the world, he responded with three questions. The first question was, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? Which is not a selfish statement, but it is self-regarding. It's saying if you presume to lead, you better know something about what you're about. You better know something about the values, the resources, what's moving you, because you have to give account of that. The second question he says to ask yourself is, if I am for myself alone, what am I? Which is suggested to be a who and not a what, is to recognize that we exist in the world in relationship with others, and that our capacity to realize our objectives is wrapped up inextricably with the capacity of others to realize theirs, so we exist in relationship in the world. And thirdly, he says, ask yourself, if not now, when? Which is not advice to jump off a bridge, but it does draw attention to the fact that we can rarely learn what we need to learn to be effective at what we hope to do without actually doing it. In other words, learning flows from action, it doesn't precede action. And so, in my understanding, leadership really is about the relationship among those three elements, the self, the other, and action, and how they interact with each other. Now, it's also important, though, that he responded with questions and not answers. He didn't say, here's the answer, folks. He says, here's some questions to ask yourself. Well, and that makes sense, too, because if you think about the domain of leadership, is it when everything is working? Is it when everything's functioning fine? Everything's okay? No problems? What do you need leadership for? Everything's fine. It's when things are broken, contradictory, dilemmas, problems, novel, unexpected. That's the domain in which leadership is required. It's the domain of the uncertain, not the certain. So it means that it's much more about encountering uncertainty and finding purpose through it than it is about trying to assert control or try to operate within a domain of control. Now that's kind of scary because it means accepting as a given uncertainty, the unexpected. This is a domain in which it's not all clear, it's not all nailed down. That's kind of scary. It's challenging to the hands in the sense, how will I know I have the skills I need to deal with these new challenges, much less enable others to? It's a challenge to the head. How can I use my resources in new ways to deal with these challenges? Or can I? Which is a strategic challenge to the head. And it's a challenge to the heart. How do I find the courage? How do I find the hopefulness? How do I inspire others with the hopefulness and the courage to take risks, to deal with the unexpected and the novel in constructive ways? So come to think of leadership then as having three dimensions, the head dimension, the hands dimension, and the heart dimension. And as defined in this way, accepting responsibility, because there's a choice to accept responsibility to lead or not, accepting responsibility to enable others. So this is not a diva idea of leadership. This is not leader as charismatic sun that illuminates all who come close with some heat. That's not it. It's a form of social interaction with other people to achieve purpose under conditions of uncertainty. Accepting responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose under conditions of uncertainty. And that means it's thinking of leadership less as a position or a person as a practice, as a way of doing things, a way of engaging purposefully. And of course, we all know examples of people in positions of authority who are awful leaders. But we also come across people who have no positions of authority and exercise leadership all the time, whether from a kitchen table or a small neighborhood store or whatever it might be. So I want to be clear, what we're focusing on here is the practice of leadership and practicing leadership in these circumstances. Narrative is a way in which we learn to mobilize the emotional resources to act purposefully, to choose purposefully in the face of challenge. And that's what we're going to focus on. And public narrative is a way of harnessing the power of narrative to the work of leadership through developing what I call a story of self, a story of us, and a story of now, and bringing them all together. And that's what we're going to work on today. Now, this public narrative stuff, the self, us, now, certainly wasn't invented at the Kennedy School. The first instance I know of it was in Exodus 8, actually, where Moses is kind of an interesting character to me because he was a Jew who was an Egyptian. He was of the oppressed but raised in the house of the oppressor, which gave him some real identity issues. And when he confronted that sort of contradiction, he didn't know how to handle it. His rage took over. He killed somebody. He had to flee. He fled off to the desert, which in the Bible is where you go to figure stuff out. And there he found a wife, a father-in-law, and became a shepherd. And one day he's walking along with his sheep, and he sees this glow off the side of the road. And he's a curious guy, and he's kind of courageous. He steps off the road to see what this glow is, and it turns out to be this bush, and it's burning, but it's not being consumed. And at that point, he hears a voice, Moses, or Moses, we're not sure. There's some theological contention about exactly how the voice sounded. You're being called to go to step up and exercise leadership and free your people. And for those familiar with the text, what's the first question Moses asks?
What's your name?
First question is, why me? Why me? I'm not able. I'm not equipped. I don't have the skills. Why are you picking me? Then the next question, wait a second, who are you? And who are these people? And third question, couldn't this wait a little bit? Got to do it now. That's when God negotiates with him and gives him magic tricks and his brother and so forth to help him along. My only point is that this question about the relationship of self to other to action is an old question, old set of questions, and you find them being asked everywhere. First time I asked myself these questions was when I was a junior here at Harvard College in 1964. I am shocked to say we're having our 50th reunion this year. It's kind of remarkable, actually. And I volunteered for the Mississippi Summer Project, which then took me away from Harvard to Mississippi and introduced me to the Civil Rights Movement and to the work that I was going to be doing for the next 28 years, actually, the work of organizing. After sort of getting educated about race, power, and politics in America and Mississippi, went back home where I'd grown up in California, Bakersfield, California, at the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley, Cesar Chavez had just started a grape strike 30 miles from there, organizing migrant farm workers to form a union. And I'd grown up in that world but hadn't seen it. I had to go to Mississippi and get educated about race, power, and politics in this country to see a very similar situation right where I had grown up. People of color with no real political rights, no economic protections, and California with its own rich history of racial segregation going back to the turn of the century with the Chinese. And it became evident that Mississippi was not an example, not an exception to America, but an example of the America that needed to be changed. Began working with Cesar, did that for the next 16 years, which is where I learned the craft, and then another 10 years of union issue and electoral organizing, and then became stuck. And that's when I got invited to my 25th reunion here at Harvard. Harvard's very smart about the 25th reunion. They figured two things have happened. He's laughing. You have a kid and you've made money. The convergence gives Harvard a real interest, right? This is like how it works. Now, it wasn't so in my case, but I came to that reunion.